A ruthless biker cruelly kicked the loyal dog of a homeless man in a supermarket parking lot. Little did he know that the sharp and contemplative eyes of Barron were watching everything. That moment, seemingly overlooked by society, became an indelible mark for everyone who witnessed it. An act of cruelty that might have passed unnoticed was suddenly altered by fate's unexpected intervention. Someone appeared at the right place and the right time, changing the course of everything. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're tuning in from. Leave your city or country in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we'll bring you another inspiring story made just for you. The supermarket parking lot, as usual, was bustling with activity. The sound of carts, the hum of wheels on the ground, and the chatter of people created a monotonous symphony. But in a hidden corner, away from most people's gaze, another story was unfolding. In that shadowy nook, where the indifferent eyes of the crowd rarely wandered, a man sat on the ground. He held a tattered cardboard sign with a message scrawled in shaky yet heartfelt letters: "Please help me and my best friend." Beside him lay a dog with patchy fur, quiet and watchful, its calm eyes brimming with awareness as it silently observed the noisy world around it. Occasionally, the man would reach out to stroke the dog, and it would respond with a gentle wag of its tail. It was a simple act, yet it held an entire world of connection and comfort, unspoken but deeply felt. The bond between them transcended what words could ever express. A few weeks earlier, on the coldest winter night of his life, the man had been utterly exhausted, feverish, and drowning in despair. Sitting in that secluded corner, he believed he wouldn't see the light of another day. At the edge of hopelessness, the dog had appeared like a miracle. Without a bark or a commotion, it simply lay beside him, its warm body silently saying, "You are not alone." As dawn broke, the man's fever began to subside, and a strange flicker of hope ignited within him. He felt no longer entirely empty, no longer entirely abandoned. From that moment onward, the man and the dog became inseparable companions. The dog was not just a friend, it was a small light in the darkness of his life, the reason he found the strength to face each new day. Day after day, they sat there, quietly together, tucked away in a small corner of the world that the hurried masses rarely noticed. They lived in silence, wrapped in the fragile peace they had built for themselves. But then, in an unexpected moment, their routine was shattered. Fate, as it often does, had prepared a twist no one could have foreseen. The noise of the parking lot was abruptly torn apart by the roar of a motorcycle. The engine screamed, its sharp sound reverberating and drawing every eye toward its source. The bike screeched to a halt, its tires shrieking against the pavement, slicing through the air like a knife. Then the engine died, leaving behind a chilling silence that hung in the air, a forewarning of something ominous. From the bike, a tall man dismounted. His worn leather jacket and heavy boots thudded against the ground with a deliberate finality. He removed his helmet, revealing a sun-weathered face and piercing eyes that scanned the parking lot like a predator seeking prey. His smirk carried an undercurrent of menace. His gaze settled on a hidden corner. There, a homeless man sat on the ground with a small, patchy furred dog beside him. The man's smirk deepened into something even more sinister. He began walking toward them slowly, his steps resounding like the cold beats of fate. A tense atmosphere descended over the parking lot. Onlookers avoided his gaze, unwilling to become entangled in what was about to unfold. When he was just a few steps away, he stopped. Tilting his head slightly, his eyes glinted with malice. He let out a cold, mocking laugh. "Oh, look at what we have here." His voice dripped with disdain. "A homeless man and his little dog. I bet this dog is worth more than you are." The man glanced up briefly, but the biker's gaze made him immediately lower his head, as though seeking to escape any confrontation. His trembling hands gripped the cardboard sign tightly. The dog beside him let out a low growl, retreating a step before resolutely positioning itself between the man and the stranger. "Oh, what's this, little doggy?" The biker leaned down, his tone laced with mockery. "You gonna bite me? You think you can protect this piece of trash? How laughable." "Please," the man whispered, his voice barely audible. Choked by fear, he clutched the dog close, as though trying to shield it from the shadow looming over them. "Let you go? Just like that?" The biker laughed loudly, his chilling laughter sending shivers through the nearby bystanders. He took another step forward, his imposing figure casting a dark shadow over the man and his small dog. "People like you are nothing but trash, with no place here. You're just a nuisance to those who actually matter." The man kept his head down, his trembling hands clutching the small dog that stood protectively in front of its owner, baring its teeth. But the act only served to further enrage the biker. "Look at this, he thinks he can threaten me." The biker sneered, his eyes full of mockery. "I bet it doesn't even know how to bark properly. Just a useless dog, just like its owner." He raised his foot as if to kick the dog. Instinctively, the dog stepped back, and the man let out a panicked cry. "No, please, don't hurt him." The biker straightened up, bursting into a laugh filled with scorn. "Don't hurt him. Maybe you should teach him who's really in charge here." The atmosphere froze. The aggression in his eyes became even more pronounced. He took another step forward, his wicked grin widening as though preparing to do something irrevocable. But before he could act, a firm voice rang out. "Stop right there." The voice was neither loud nor threatening, but it carried an undeniable confidence that shattered the suffocating tension in the parking lot. A young man stepped forward, his stride steady and deliberate, exuding an aura that instantly drew every gaze toward him. And in that moment, the course of the story shifted in a way no one could have anticipated. The young man's voice, youthful yet imbued with authority, echoed across the parking lot, bringing with it an odd silence. Those who had previously tried to ignore the scene now turned their heads, curious to see who had dared to intervene and break the oppressive atmosphere. The biker spun around abruptly, his eyes narrowing in momentary surprise before quickly shifting to disdain. A smirk spread across his face as his gaze drilled into the young man, as if assessing the audacity of someone who would challenge him. The young man continued walking, his calm, self-assured gaze fixed on the biker. His steps were measured, his demeanor regal without a hint of ostentation. Few could have guessed that this young man was Barron Trump, the youngest son of the President of the United States, Donald Trump. Each step Barron took was steady and confident, as though he was well accustomed to facing scrutiny or challenges. Stopping just a few steps away from the biker, Barron locked eyes with him. The parking lot was blanketed in silence, the crowd holding its collective breath in the face of his resolute, commanding presence. Though no one knew Barron's true identity, his aura, the way he stood there with confidence and quiet dignity, captured everyone's attention. A strange, expectant stillness enveloped the parking lot, as though the world itself was pausing to witness something monumental about to unfold. Want to know how this touching story ends? Hit the like button and subscribe to our channel to stay updated and never miss another incredible story to come. "Do you think this is right?" Barron's voice rang out, not loud, but commanding enough to make the biker pause momentarily. The biker spun around, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before he smirked, masking his unease with arrogance. "Who do you think you are?" he sneered, his voice laced with contempt. "A wannabe hero here to lecture me? How amusing." Barron didn't reply immediately. He took another step forward, his unwavering gaze locked onto the biker. "This isn't about me," Barron said, his voice steady and firm. "This is about you, about how you treat them." He nodded slightly toward the homeless man and the small dog, both of whom were shrinking away from the looming threat. "They don't belong here," the biker shouted, his voice rising in a desperate bid to assert control. "They're just a nuisance. People like that shouldn't even exist." Barron tilted his head slightly, his eyes sharp and unyielding. "Do you think hurting those who can't defend themselves makes you stronger? Or does it only reveal how weak and consumed by anger you really are?" The biker clenched his teeth, clearly losing his composure. He stepped forward, his shoulders tense, trying to project an intimidating presence. "Listen, kid, I don't need a morality lesson from you. You might be somebody out there, but here you're just another boy trying to act tough." Barron remained unfazed. And you're just a man letting his anger consume him, Barron countered, his voice as steady as stone. But your anger will never be a justification to hurt others. His gaze dropped briefly to the bottle of alcohol clutched in the biker's hand, partially obscured by his leg. And it certainly doesn't excuse driving under the influence. The words landed like a heavy blow, making the biker freeze for a moment. His eyes flickered with confusion before he quickly tried to recover, letting out a scoff to mask his unease. "You don't know anything about me," he growled, his voice rough as though he was trying to conceal the unease in his expression. His grip tightened around the bottle, clinging to it as if it were the last shred of his confidence. Barron remained calm, his eyes fixed firmly on the biker. "Perhaps I don't know," he said, his steady voice landing like hammer blows on the biker's fragile pride. "But what you do, what you say, it all reveals who you truly are." The parking lot fell into a deep silence, the crowd's eyes collectively drawn to Barron, filled with both admiration and agreement. A murmur began spreading like an invisible wave, cornering the biker with no way out. He clenched his fists tightly, his shoulders stiff with the inner conflict of whether to confront or back down. The once silent bystanders now started whispering among themselves. The murmurs grew louder, like an unseen tide gradually pressing the biker into a corner with no escape. The crowd stares and murmurs felt like needles piercing his pride. The tension in the air grew heavier, forcing the biker to clench his fists and square his shoulders, caught between the urge to retaliate and the shame of retreat. Before he could decide, Barron took another step forward, his piercing gaze locking onto the bikers. His confidence seemed to thicken the atmosphere. "So what will you do?" Barron's voice cut through the thick tension, steady but sharp, each word landing like a boulder and weighing down the already boiling situation. The biker's breathing was heavy, ragged, as if struggling to suppress an eruption. His furious eyes stayed fixed on Barron, but the unease in them was now undeniable. The air between them tightened like a drawn bowstring, and the surrounding crowd seemed to hold its breath, caught in the unbearable tension. The crowd grew larger, their murmurs transforming into voices of support for Barron. The biker felt the weight of judgmental stares closing in. His anger boiled over, his hands tightening into fists as if trying to crush the pressure bearing down on him. "You think you can humiliate me in front of all these people?" he roared, his voice a guttural growl, his eyes burning with fury. "Do you even know what it's like to hit rock bottom, to be crushed beneath everything?" Barron tilted his head slightly, his eyes glowing with a strange intensity as he replied, his voice deep and deliberate, each word cutting like a blade. "Your anger isn't about me or him," Barron nodded briefly toward the homeless man. "It's about you. And what you're doing right now is spreading your pain to those who don't deserve it." Barron's words pierced through the biker's raging exterior. He froze, his shoulders sagging slightly, and his eyes flickered with unease, revealing a weary man burdened with pain. But then he gritted his teeth, shouting in a last-ditch effort to reassert control. "You don't know anything about me," he bellowed, his voice echoing across the parking lot. "You think you're a hero? You think you can save these miserable people and their dogs? How ridiculous." Barron took another step forward, now just a few feet from him. His voice dropped lower, steady and resolute, each word hitting like a hammer to the ground, leaving no room for retreat. "What you do now will define who you are. Hurting those who cannot defend themselves won't solve your problems. It will only create more pain, yours and theirs." The entire parking lot was enveloped in silence. Barron's gaze remained locked on the biker, unwavering, unflinching. The crowd now stood frozen, as if collectively holding their breath, waiting for the dramatic confrontation to reach its climax. The tension hung thick in the air. Even the homeless man, who had kept his head down in avoidance, now looked up, his eyes filled with a glimmer of hope, as though he had found his last beacon of light in Barron. The biker glanced around, realizing that dozens of eyes were now fixed on him, judgmental, silent, yet piercingly powerful. He gritted his teeth, his hands clenching into fists. It was clear he was wrestling with himself, torn between surrendering to the mounting pressure or lashing out instinctively, regardless of the consequences. Suddenly he bent down and picked up a bottle of liquor, his eyes blazing with fury. His hand trembled as he gripped the bottle tightly, wielding it as if to regain control of the situation. "You think you can take me on?" he roared, raising the bottle in a threatening gesture. His voice echoed across the parking lot, a desperate attempt to dominate the scene. "You think you're better than me just because everyone here is on your side?" Barron didn't flinch. Standing tall, his gaze bore into the bikers, his voice calm yet commanding as it rang out. "This isn't about who's on whose side. It's about doing what's right. And what you're doing right now isn't just wrong, it's dangerously reckless for you and everyone else." Barron's words sliced through the biker's defenses like a knife. The biker's grip on the bottle tightened, his knuckles turning white, yet his feet remained planted. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to press down on everyone, as though the crowd itself was holding its collective breath, waiting for his next move. "You don't know anything about me," the biker shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of his frustration and despair. "You don't know what I've been through, what I've lost. Don't tell me what's right or wrong." Barron took another step forward, closing the distance between them. He could smell the pungent stench of alcohol wafting from the bottle in the biker's hand. "Maybe I don't," Barron said, his voice lower, but firm and steady. "But I can see that you're lost. And what you're doing now isn't going to bring you anything good. It's only going to bury you deeper in the pain you're trying so hard to escape." The biker hesitated, his body faltering for a moment. He took an involuntary step back, his shoulders sagging as though the strength within him was draining away. His eyes flicked to the bottle in his hand, now trembling, his expression wavering between anger and regret. But then, as if to reaffirm his dominance, he raised the bottle higher, glaring at Barron with defiant eyes. "If you think you can stop me, then go ahead and try," he bellowed, his lips curling into a smirk that couldn't hide the turmoil bubbling beneath the surface. Before he could act, a sharp whistle pierced through the tense atmosphere, shattering the silence. The entire parking lot turned toward the source of the sound, waiting for something to break the stalemate. The small dog, which had been silent and watchful until now, suddenly let out a resounding bark. The powerful sound startled the biker, making him freeze, his eyes widening in surprise. Standing tall and resolute, the dog seemed to declare that it would not allow anything terrible to happen. Barron stepped forward, his gaze softening as he looked at the homeless man and the dog. Maybe this is the only place he has, and this dog is everything to him. But what are you doing? You're not helping. You're only making things worse and spreading your own pain to others. Barron's words caused the biker to falter. His grip on the bottle loosened, and his eyes flickered with a mix of anger. He turned back toward his motorcycle, mumbling, "I'm just tired." Then, without another word, he sped off, leaving behind a parking lot heavy with silence and introspection. Barron approached the homeless man, his gaze warm and kind. "Are you okay?" he asked. The man nodded, tears streaming down his face. Barron handed him a card. "Take your dog here. They'll help both of you." The man clutched the dog tightly, his eyes shimmering with a glimmer of hope amidst the adversity. Sometimes, even the smallest act of kindness can change a life. Never underestimate the power of compassion, whether it comes from a stranger or a loyal four-legged friend. If this story has touched your heart, we hope you'll help share this message by clicking like and sharing it with your friends. Help us reach our first milestone of 1,000 subscribers. It truly means the world to us, and will allow us to create more meaningful stories for you. Don't forget to share your thoughts on the story and let us know where you're watching from. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next story.